This is the Criterion Creeps podcast, and tonight we're talking about Juliet of the Spirits, directed by Federico Fellini from 1965. The tagline for this film: the inhibitions, the desires, the obsessions of a jealous woman held prisoner by her own dreams. And the synopsis of the film: middle-aged Julieta grows suspicious of her husband Giorgio when his behavior grows increasingly questionable. One night, when Giorgio initiates a seance among his friends, Julieta gets in touch with spirits and learns more about herself and her painful past. Slightly skeptical, but intrigued, she visits a mystic who gives her more information and nudges her toward the realization that her husband is indeed a philanderer. That is not a very accurate write-up, as we've come to grow accustomed to here on the podcast. His information just not there. Like, Giorgio initiates a seance, but he doesn't.
Do you think it's people who actually watch the movies, or is it someone who, a lot of them to me feel like someone who has explained the movie and then they write it up themselves?
Yeah. So I was like curious. As you do, you look on Wikipedia for some general kind of notes. This movie doesn't really actually have a whole bunch, but you usually tell like the movies that people really gravitate toward because they have like really long, in-depth plot, like point by point plots. This movie barely gets like a couple sentences, and I'm like,
it's weird.
That's interesting. It's like one of those things where I'm like, do people even watch this movie, or do they just talk about how much they like this movie? So I had never seen Juliet of the Spirits before. I really didn't know what this was about. I kind of remember this was like on Ebert's Great Movies list, talking about how this seems to be a movie that a lot of people consider as kind of the like jumping off point for like Fellini, as far as like him like making. Really? Yeah, this is the one.
Okay, wait, I'll let you finish, but
Okay.
I have something to say about that.
Well, it's like, because you have 8.5 prior to this, and then like Juliet of the Spirits is the one where it's like, oh, it's like the cliche with Fellini is like he becomes like this just indulgent filmmaker who just makes movies about nothing in particular. And I've seen one of those types of movies. There's the one that I'm really curious to rewatch down the road, Fellini's Satyricon, which I tried watching like kind of like, I think maybe even it might have been the first Fellini movie I ever watched for some reason, because they had it at a video store, and that was just like, I did not get that thing at all. But so this is the movie, like, but so based on Ebert's coverage of this movie, talking about how this is kind of like the flip side to 8.5. So Julieta Masson, who plays Juliet here, it's Fellini's wife. You'll remember her from Knights of Cabiria. This is the movie that's like the flip of 8.5, where you get it from like the wife's perspective of this man who's about town and busy, leaving her to be at home. She's got the same haircut as wife in 8.5. And there's just like kind of like slight little visual cues and stuff like that. And even the structure of Juliet of the Spirits is very 8.5-ish, which I'll kind of get more into. So anyway, immediately you're hit with Nina Rota music, so you know you're watching a Fellini movie. And you get like this, like I don't know, when you listen to this, I think of Fellini, but I also think of Woody Allen simultaneously for whatever reason.
Because Woody Allen does so many Fellini things?
Well, he made that one, Stardust Memories, and he's on record being a Fellini fan. But like that type of music is there. And also, like, I guess I think I associate more with Woody Allen than I do like Larry David. But Larry David uses more Nina Rota and A Curb Your Enthusiasm than Woody Allen did in any of his movies. I don't understand. So anyway, I had never seen this before. And this is a movie that I had the hardest turnaround while watching a movie I've ever experienced in the Criterion watching.
Were you negative and then turned positive, or positive turned negative?
Okay, so...
Or can you elaborate a little bit on whatever you're talking about?
I wound up watching this movie twice. The first time I watched it, I was like okay with it for like the first half hour. I was kind of like not feeling it though. And then there came a point where I fell asleep. I like fell asleep for like, I don't know how long, but I was like kind of like forcing myself to get awake while I was watching things, and I was kind of in and out and being like, what is this? And I was just getting kind of frustrated and angry about like having to watch the movie at the time and being like, oh, I don't want to do this at all. Like I was just like like I was just like,
you know what it sounds like?
what?
It sounds exactly like when I was watching Knights of Cabiria.
Yeah. So I stopped watching it. I was just like,
Uh-huh.
okay, I gotta take a break. And so I went and did something else that evening. I came back and I'm like, okay, I still have to finish watching this goddamn movie. So I sat down and I picked up, and I'm pretty sure that where my next, like when I went back to it, it was after the clairvoyant scene with Bishma the clairvoyant. It was after Jose the special guest, but it would have been basically when the chubby cat, when Susie's cat shows up in the backyard. That's kind of like when I kind of came back into that movie. And then I was like kind of going along with it, and I was just like, what is with this movie? And I'm like, this movie is like so like much like the cliche, like what people are talking about, like this is like Fellini at his most indulgent, and it's like, what is this? Like it's like all just falling apart like before my eyes. Like what? Why is this movie talked about in any way? I don't get it. But then like the other shoe falls for me, and like this movie hits a shift. And it's very similar to 8.5 in some ways. So what happens is, jumping ahead, when Juliet gets the phone call from the like private investigator she's hired, and she goes into the office and she sat down, she gets to watch this like film. It's so similar to the scene in 8.5 where like it's basically you're watching the embarrassment and humiliation of like being cast and watching your life kind of like play out in front of you. It plays out the same way, but it's like not a fictionalized film. It's like literally like her husband's being caught in the act of cheating on her, and it's like done in this like all the dialogue of the investigators. It reminds me of like a Coen Brothers movie where they're like very like professional and presenting it, but then they're talking about the bill and like, oh, I hope everything works out great for you. Anyways, we got to take care of this, and it's like so bureaucratic and like totally underscoring like her like emotional like experience watching this. And that's where the movie really takes a turn for me. That was like kind of like where I was like, oh, well, that was interesting. Like like that was good. And then it kind of shifts to the where she goes to like the back to the neighbor Susie's place for the nightlife, and it's kind of again like this like on this nose of like Fellini, like the costumes, the set design, the production, the cameras, the figures and the faces. It's just like, yup, this is totally Fellini, and like in the whole like crazy brothel. And I was just kind of like, okay. There's like the one the houseboy, the Susie's godson with the eyebrows, like that like seduction scene. I was kind of like, I don't know about this. But then she like turns on it. But like, at this point, like I'd fallen asleep for like about 20 minutes of this movie earlier on. And I was kind of like, what the hell's going on? But then RJ, from like the backyard luncheon, where like she's like kind of like dealing with all these people in the backyard, and she starts getting the visions of like the spirits. From that point on, this movie's amazing. Like it is like so fucking good. I was just like absolutely like, oh man, this is like because it's like Toby Damn It, where it's just like this crazy spiral of like images. And so this prompted me, I'm like, I think I have to rewatch this. I have to watch this movie a second time, because just like, but I'm gonna watch it on Canopy on a desktop, and I'm gonna screen cap the hell out of this thing. And so I started watching this movie again, and then suddenly like all these things, watching it a second time, start snapping into place, and I'm watching it in a totally different way, kind of knowing where it's coming from. And there's still like the scenes in this movie that I feel like they do not work. Like the entire sequence where she goes with her friends to Bishma the clairvoyant, and she has this whole thing that kind of just reiterates everything that happened at the seance earlier in the film. That whole sequence, I do not like how it's done. I felt it's very draggy and kind of like incoherent, and they follow that up with the story where she's driving back with her friends, and she's talking about like, oh, this reminds me of this or maybe that's even earlier on. Anyway, she goes home, and there's like Jose, the special guest, like her husband's work partner, and he's just like, she's like really, and like, oh, he's such a sweet, sensitive man, but he's just like so melancholic and ennui and just like rambling on, and like that seems like I get why it's in this, but at the same time, it's like I was like, no, those two scenes still don't really work for me compared to like everything else. Where it's like watching it the second time, I was like, oh, this makes sense. I understand what's going on. I've got a better sense of this movie because Fellini does not even attempt to like explain who some of the characters are. Like you have to like really infer. Like there's like that first scene at the beach, and there's this like loudmouth guy just like bellowing out at her, like this like very boisterous Italian man, and you realize, oh, that's the doctor, like he was talking about. And I'm like, and like there's these things where like, oh god, I didn't like think about that. But also like when I tried watching this movie at the beginning, I was just like not feeling it, so I don't know how checked out I was. It wasn't until like you get those certain dream images, like when she's like on the beach and she kind of like falling asleep, and then you have this like old man coming out of the sea with this giant rope, and that's like that's awesome. Like it's just like that's a really nice evocative moment. But anyway, yeah. So this movie, I had like the first time watching it, like that middle section, boy, I was just like ready to be like, man, this is a real miss of Fellini. But that last third for me, man, I fucking love it. It is so good. And it's like I've been thinking about it since then. It plays all the strengths of him. It's like between him and his cinematographer, who also does a lot of work. Like the visuals are just so good. And I was actually thinking about Hereditary here as well. It's like this movie that like this is what Hereditary is kind of trying to be like. And it's like, and it comes back to the thing I've said before. It's like in another life, Federico Fellini would have been an amazing horror film director because he does visual stuff that like, it's like, I don't even know what the fuck I just saw. And it's like for a second, he doesn't linger on it and it doesn't come off as funny. It comes off as disturbing because it's like unexpected. So anyways, that explains why I watched this movie twice on Letterboxd. RJ seemed to be very concerned about this.
I was very taken aback. I was like, whoa, what's going on here? I was like, when have you ever watched the Creep twice in a row?
Without a commentary?
Yeah. I was a little thrown off, but I'm glad you elaborated a little bit.
Yeah. So that's my feelings on Juliet of the Spirits at this time. RJ, I am very curious to hear what you thought of this film.
First of all, I have two questions.
Yep.
Are you going to watch every Criterion Creep movie twice now?
I would love to if time permitted, because...
Don't make excuses.
I would love to.
Are you going to do it?
No.
Good. Okay. And the other thing but it's just, it is interesting to hear you say how much you turned, and then on the rewatch, how much you benefited from that, which is probably why people always yell at me for having first time watches about movies. And they're like, well, you got to watch it a bunch of times to appreciate it. And it's like, yeah, I get that. But at the same time, like, if you can't enjoy the movie the first time. Anyways, that's a whole different thing. My other question for you, when you were doing the intro to this, and a lot of people are saying that this is the introduction to Fellini. Not
introduction. This is the end of it. This is like the downfall.
No, I mean, when people were talking, did you say that people were saying this is like the entrance point for people to start watching Fellini? Oh, okay.
This is some of that.
I thought that's what you said.
No. This is some of that patented RJ doesn't know how to listen very well. No, this is like the this is the jumping off point. It's like this is like so. When I was reading Ebert's essay that he wrote for this film in the early 2000s, he was talking about how this is the movie that like historically people point to as like the beginning of like when Fellini becomes unwatchable, indulgent crap. This is the movie that like people point to, and he was arguing that that's not the case at all. So the opposite of what you're hearing.
Okay. I was listening when you were talking, but also I sometimes fill in the blanks myself. No, if I don't hear something,
this movie is the furthest in my mind. Okay, this is like advanced studies of Fellini.
That's what I was thinking, because you said that, and I was like, I disagree with that completely. Okay. I was like, you can't jump in on this one.
Fuck no.
Well, okay, that's what I was wondering, because I almost interrupted you. Okay. And then I was like, I'll just wait. I'll bring it up later.
You were making weird faces and sounds there. I'm like, what? And I was like, okay.
Well, I was just like, that's so weird. I was like, in what world would this be the one that you start with? Like, I would think like the ship sails on would be a really easy like entrance point, or like, I don't know, Amicord, whatever. But yeah, you said that, or I thought you said that, and I was just
Mm.
like, what the fuck is this guy talking about? Doesn't matter. Um, so I'll get back to the main point here. As always, I am pretty trepidatious when we get to my man Federico the Fart Fellini. I like Fellini for the most part. I do like that Toby Dammit. 8.5 is pretty spectacular. I liked Amicord more than I would have wanted to. But then again, Ship Sails On I thought was okay. Knights of Cabiria, like I mentioned before, I was in a real bad mood when I watched that, even though you liked it a lot. So that left a bad taste in my mouth. And then La Dolce Vita, which I really dislike, but we'll get to that one day. Well, I don't know about dislike, but anyways, that's indulgent for me more than this thing was. Juliet of the Spirits, I was watching it, and my first response was, I think Jarrett is going to love this movie, even within the first half an hour, because that beach scene, as soon as that beach scene happened, I was like, oh yeah. I was like, this is Jarrett's kind of thing. When you see those like emaciated horses on a raft, and then all those...
The cargo boat of people?
Yeah, like ugly, naked people just like standing around. I was like, oh yeah. I was like, this is a Jarrett pick right here. You'll be pleased to hear, which I think is more often the case than not, that I did like this movie.
So the one, like, I think the weakest of the Fellini films, though, is Variety Lights.
Oh yeah, see, I didn't even remember that.
See, that's the one that I'm being like, essentially that's his first film, but it's just like very like it's very there. It's not even that's like terrible. It's just very forgettable.
It's just whatever.
Yeah,
it's not a big deal. Yeah, Variety Lights is nothing special, but Fellini, he's got to be like the biggest hitter so far in the Creep, because we've covered 8 of his movies so far. Oh no, 7.
Yeah,
because I was looking. I've watched 9, and Spirits of the Dead. Oh no, maybe 6. Spirits of the Dead, La Dolce Vita, and Toby Dammit are in there, so 6. Anyways, yeah, we've watched a lot of his stuff.
Yeah,
but yeah, Variety Lights is definitely the low point for him, just because it's a movie. It's nothing more. But yes, I did like Juliet of the Spirits for a few reasons. The biggest one, kind of like what you said, like that beach scene is phenomenal. The garden hallucination scene is phenomenal. I love the martyr nuns and the visuals that come with them. Not even like that scene as a whole is so well put together, but the way that the nuns look, like how they're completely shrouded, I think is so like piercing when you see that. It's such a, I don't know, the image like sticks out with me so much. And then you get into like the confetti flames, which is such a cool technique, like such a like an amazing and beautiful practical effect, where it's just like, man, that looks fucking great. I love that. Speaking of the shrouded nuns, just on a tangent for one point, I love how people are always like shrouded by shadows in this movie.
Yes.
Where, that was another point I wanted to interrupt you when you're like, who are these characters? Like the doctor on the beach, where it's like almost intentionally vague. Like with where there's certain characters you just don't see their face, and you're like, I wonder why he's doing that.
And he does it like obviously a lot, like, because it's always like
it's blatant.
Because usually in a film you light everybody, you can always see their faces, and like someone in the foreground is lit the same as somebody in the background. It's a very important detail, but in this movie he's actively obfuscating the faces of people in complete shadow, like where there's people like, oh, you can kind of make out the person because they didn't get complete darkness on that, but like it is like a theme of that. Yeah.
And it's a very blatant, like, intentional thing, because even the entire intro of the movie, you don't see Juliet for like 2-3 minutes, because her face is intentionally concealed.
Yeah, the camera's always moving out of the shot of her face while she's trying to choose what wig that she's going to wear. And there's also like near the end of the movie, like there's like all those shots of like the back of heads, and I was like, 8.5 has a lot of shots of people's back of their heads. Like there's a lot of like that going on too. And in this movie, he's like almost has this idea of like, well, I'm going to challenge myself by showing the front of people's face, but not actually show you their face. Yeah, it's like such a odd technique that's just like, this movie is very much about like discombobulation, because just like putting you at unease, because there's angles in this that are like, they're so unnaturally shot, like they're just framed in a way that's like, they're like, when I've got so many screenshots from that final montage of the movie when she's like kind of being like brought down upon by the spirits, all like basically attacking the house. There's just these angles you're like, that doesn't make any sense, but it's beautiful, and like I've never seen anything shot like that quite there. It's always like so perfectly composed, whereas this is just like effortlessly composed in a sloppy way that looks exactly perfect.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's kind of what I was trying to get at too, where there's certain elements like that I think are done so well. And like with the constant like obstruction of faces and stuff like that, I would be lying if I said I knew exactly what he meant all the time. But I
don't know.
I really like, though, and it's kind of like what you touched on, and we've brought it up before because we're fans of the genre, but I think Federico Fellini is a way better horror director than he is anything else. And there's so many things that he does so much better than anyone else in like the horror genre, for like what you said, creating that unease and that tension and that like discomfort, because it's very like, there's a lot of things that happen very fast, and there's a lot of things that like you don't understand, and I think that's what kind of makes it, that's what builds that unease into it, where like showing the backs of heads or showing the fronts of faces, but without showing the faces, where I think this movie particularly has that kind of like horror dream, that like nightmare manifestation, where it's like there are these things that are, what are you doing over there? You're ruining the podcast. There are these things that are like made real, and he does it in such an elegant way, like with the horror stuff, where like I feel like you're just watching his dreams, where in his dreams he doesn't see people's faces, and it's all this very kind of like blunt and fast visuals that don't really go together, and that's kind of what makes them upsetting almost, where it's like the sequence of these things, they don't make sense and they don't line up, and that's what's puts you off.
He keeps the audience so much on their toes, but he's presenting a drama. Like, because I was wondering about this movie, because to me I'm like, this is like really feels like a horror film, and I was like, oh no, it's like classified as like comedy, drama, and fantasy.
Comedy, yeah.
What a funny movie. But it's just like, no, but I think it's because of those elements that's always like when horror stuff is always more effective, because you're not expecting it. You're not like going into this movie that's like, oh yeah, this is the horror movie I've signed up to watch. And this, when that stuff hits, you're just like, that's so much more effective because I'm not expecting it.
Yeah, exactly. And
well, the opening shot of this movie, it's like the camera is like kind of in the woods, like amongst the trees, and then it's like kind of moving in toward the house. And when I was watching this the second time, I was like, oh, it's kind of like an Evil Dead, where like the camera's moving in on the cabin, but it's like so ridiculous in that, because it's like this fast-paced thing where you have a sense that like it's like some sort of demonic driving force behind the camera. But in this, it's like so like, why is that shot in this movie? And it's like one of the opening things of just like moving in on this house, and it's like just like a tossed away thing. But it also kind of sets up this thing about like outside forces are like manifesting against her, and she's completely oblivious to that thing happening outside of her. And because she's this dutiful wife that's just like, life's what it is, and this is what I'm used to, and she doesn't realize that there's things. And it's a very obvious kind of like, I guess, metaphor, I guess, or a visual thing being set up. But it's just like, I didn't even think about that the first time I was watching it, other than like I was trying to watch it also in a like washed out room with the sun coming in, and I was like, what's going on? Oh, it's some trees and like a house. And then watching it like in a on the desktop off canopy, it looked much sharper.
Yeah, that was how I watched it as well, like on my TV but through canopy. And yeah, it looked great. It was real crisp. But that's kind of like the one thing that I was going to say too is where some of it is like really obvious metaphors, and like what I was saying, where it's like the manifestation of dreams, but it's also kind of like personal fears and like rationalizing those things, where for her it's like divorce and aging and sexuality, and it's all these things that like she is uncomfortable with, and she doesn't really want to face, and then it kind of comes out in this physical form. Like, to her it's physical, but it's kind of like hallucinations or dreams or however you want to interpret the spirits parts of it. Right. But it's all these things that, like, you can tell she's kind of afraid of, like divorce and sexuality and aging, because she's like moved away from that almost, and then it's coming back to her, and she doesn't want it to. So that was kind of like how I interpreted like the metaphors for what she was seeing. Is like it's these themes. It's like A, B, C, D, and this is like how she's taking that on. And I relate to Juliet a lot, because girlfriend just wants to hang out at home and watch TV and eat fabulous snacks all the time. And I'm like, that's the life. But like Giorgio, he just wants to go out and party, and he's always bringing back parties to her house. Oh, I know guys like that. I know guys.
Hey, RJ, this is like one of my go-tos at this point, but that like scene where it's like she's kind of prepared this like low-key, her and her servants, they've prepared this like low-key dinner for her and her husband on their anniversary, and he surprises her with a party, and I was just like, oh, it's like Mother all over again, where like all these fucking people show up, and they don't want to leave, and you're like, oh, I guess I should be moved that my husband loves me so much because he's invited all of her friends again, and you know that it's like this isn't the first time. This is like always what's going on, and he's always like, oh yeah, I gotta leave. I got that trip in the morning. I gotta go to bed. See you later. I'm gone. I'll give you a call. I'll call you later. And he passes this on via servants or other people. He never actually tells her these things, so she's always kind of like having to like perform this life. And then again, like the Mother vibe of like when she like basically the house is like under attack by like the spirit forces that are like I don't know what they are, like if there's like an actual like spiritual aspect or if it's just all in her head. It doesn't matter in this movie at all.
No, it
I don't
don't matter.
Yeah, but like because it seems like it's the seance that they have kind of like opens up these things, because there's a continuity between the names. Like is it Otis is one of the names of the figures who's like the like very hateful character, and Iris, they get mentioned in the one seance, and then they get brought over in the clairvoyance names. So you're like, oh, there's like more than these names are coming up over and over again. So there's like sort of like that kicks loose these things, but it's also like it kicks loose these emotions and memories that she has being raised in the Catholic Church. And then it's like, oh yeah, I remember that time like my dad left because he was like basically anti-papist, like he was just like not into this stuff at all, and he ran off with a dancer from the circus.
Are you talking about personal experience or about the movie?
It's too soon, man. It's too soon.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, so like there's these these are just things that like get in the proceeds of the movie. It's like the flashback stuff that you get in 8.5 as well, where it's like these like kind of like strange dream-like flashbacks. So they're not like literal like this is exactly how it happened. They're stylizations. They're like that, and it's like the rooms don't look quite right, but it's far more effective in this like phantasmagorical kind of way that these things like, oh, that looks like the way that it should in the Fellini verse.
The Fellini verse. Yeah. And that's a cinematic universe that we could get behind.
Damn right.
The Fellini verse.
We're living it right now.
We are living it, man. We're the only ones following what you should. I don't know what I'm talking about. I dig all that stuff. I think it's really good. And it's kind of like what you said. I like that they have the seance thing there where if you wanted to, you could interpret it that way as it being literal. But like my interpretation was it was kind of her dealing with her issues, and like you said, it doesn't really matter if it's one or the other.
Yeah,
it don't matter. But yeah, like I can't even remember what we were talking about before that. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I like in this, and kind of like what I was saying before. The beach scene is awesome. You get a really fun beach hat, kind of like the tentacles sombrero. I think is the equivalent to this. This is Fellini's equivalent of a lady in a gigantic hat for no reason other than it's there. I dig that. You get the beach dreams, the spirits. Those are really scary. The backyard spirits, those guys are really scary. And then the in the house spirits, I think those guys are pretty spooky too. Like when you like cut back to them, and they're all kind of, or like you look at them and they're all doing stuff, and then she kind of looks away, and then she cuts back, and they're kind of all looking at her.
Yeah.
I was like, ooh, shit. That's pretty spooky stuff.
Well, there's the one where it's like she's like, "Be gone," and then they all disappear, and you're like, "Oh, it's over." But then it's like, "Nah, they're still there," and like it's like not like they're just using like the undead, like or using these things. It's like no, it's people living and dead. They're representations. So it's like I don't think it's like anything to be taken literal. And it's kind of funny that we're talking about it like it's a horror film because I'm sure people will be. Well, it plays like it, and that's like when it's at its best, I think. But there's also the like the domestic stuff that I'm a big fan of, like from Pygmalion and stuff like that. And earlier in the episode, we were talking about Gaslight, and there's a whole lot of that going on here with Giorgio, where it's like him like rolling around in bed, Gabriella. And then after being confronted about it the next morning, he's like, "What? Oh, there's that book I was looking for." And then he like picks it up and she keeps talking. And then he just like kind of puts it on the shelf. And he's just like, "See you later." It's like
Jarrett style.
Yeah. So yeah, there's quite a bit of that. And it's like, yeah, this guy's a piece of shit. And then just like, yeah, the kind of like the final confrontation that she has with, Gabriella, that she never is a person she never meets. She's like a phantom herself. There's like these these ringing phones that there's never anyone on the other side. She sees photos and videos little surveillance cameras of her in motion, but you never see her face. Even there's like the one shot, like kind of like when she's like having all these like flashback moments as her husband's leaving. It's like zooming in on who should be Gabrielle, but her face is covered with a giant hat. But yeah, there's just like so much visual splendor, RJ. There's so many things that are going on in this movie.
It's a gross thing to say.
Not too bad. We get a seventh seal homage, just like tossed in.
I noticed that. Yeah,
as they're walking up the hill to a biplane, just like in Seventh Seal.
Yeah, I noticed that. I thought that was really cool. And it's like I said, like you were saying, some of the visual stuff. I think the nuns look so cool, and all of that stuff, like the Joan of Arc stuff and the martyrs, or whatever religious story they were playing out. Yeah. I thought that scene was awesome.
The little kids playing Roman soldiers.
Yeah, that's so much fun. Like,
now you're gonna burn alive.
Don't you just want to work in a Catholic school so you can do that? Like that sounds like so much fun.
Oh my God. That's like the nerdiest thing I've ever said. Yeah.
If there was any place you could do it though.
I like the lead into that scene too. It's like she goes to see her like sex pot sculptor friend who's just like...
Oh, and she's like sex is birds and bird sounds. And she's like, "Excuse me?" And it's like, "Bah! Caw!" And she's like, "Excuse me?" And they're like, "Don't you get it, you idiot? Sex is birds." And it's like, "Be a whore." And you're just like, what is going on here? Yeah. It's that old lady making sex sounds.
Yeah. And then we get a chubby cat.
You do get a chubby cat with the bow.
You get that big bow, yeah. And then earlier on, you have that big weightlifter dude who's got like a cat laying on him during that seance scene. Like, "Hey, come join it." He's like, "No."
There was a lot of cat stuff in this, which I feel like Neil Gaiman might be a fan of this movie because he's all about cats like crossing dimensional planes and stuff like that. And one of the first lines that I really liked in this movie was that the guy's like, "I don't like cats," and someone's like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "They attract restless souls." And I was like, "Ooh, shit, that's pretty spooky." Mm-hmm. Cats are spooky, baby.
So, like, what are the chances though that we watch two movies in a row where there's a character by the name of Alyosha in it? Because like, was that not the name of the man last week? The protagonist in Ballad of a Soldier?
One is Italian and one is Russian, right?
No, they're both Russian. Because it's like a Russian guy at the house, at the neighbor's place. And I was just like, wow, it's like that's not a name I ever see much in my day-to-day life. And here we are watching two movies back to back. Well,
but maybe in Russia it's like Alex. Like how many Alex do you see in a day?
Yeah.
Alec Baldwin.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different name, but it's kind of the same thing, right?
Yeah.
I had an uncle named Alec.
Do you think that house? Do you think Susie's house looks like a fun time?
during the seance or just during regular life?
That was long past the seance. That was the neighbor with all the rumpy pumpy and brothel times.
Rumpy pumpy. Hey?
Pumpy. Yes.
I didn't like the look of a lot of the people that were attending, but whenever I see stuff like that, it just reminds me of that It's Always Sunny episode where they go to the orgy. And
no buffet though.
Yeah, the buffet. And he's like, yeah, some of the people might not be great, but at least there's food. And that's all I can think of, because I feel like the boys at Always Sunny, they must have been fans of these kinds of movies also. And these orgies are gross. Why would anyone go to these? Maybe just the food, I guess.
Maybe. There's the one sequence in this, and it kind of reminds me of Deep Red, where it's like there's like a flashlight that's kind of like beaming back and forth between like these moments that are like these women are just jumping on these dudes and they're like making these animal sounds, and like it pans off to another person and it's another like scene that you're seeing like in like whatever half coitus.
Great. What? Sorry.
Half a coitus.
Could you elaborate? I'm having trouble visualizing what you mean.
Penises and vaginas and mouths and butts, RJ.
How is that different from full coitus?
Well, it's like because it's not happening yet, because this is a nice 1965 movie still.
Oh.
It's getting there. It's kind of like the scene where like the two dudes go up to the tree and you're like, whoa, but there's only one woman up there.
Oh.
Yeah.
Jarrett. Oh no. Oh no. Hey, Fellini's got a thing for psychics and magicians.
And Catholic guilt.
Catholic guilt, but I think all good filmmakers, all good Catholic filmmakers suffer from Catholic guilt. Look at Mel Gibson.
Like Marty?
Oh, Marty. Yep. It's a good way to instill certain values into a person and for them to feel bad about them. And for them to use those bad feelings and create, right? Isn't that what art is, Jarrett? You have an art degree. You tell me.
Huh?
Huh?
I don't know nothing about that art.
Huh? What? Well, that's what I thought art was, but maybe I'm wrong. But anyways, Fellini loves magicians, and I think that's super funny.
Yeah, weirdo hacks that talk about bullshit and just like that.
Yep.
It's like, that's never gone away, has it?
Yep.
I
love it.
Just the words change, but the sentiment remains.
I think it is hilarious. You know what else I think is hilarious? The obsession with this movie with sangria. Like, did sangria just get invented, or like what was there's all that talk. It's like the potion of oblivion, and they're like it'll like connect you to the spirit, or not spirits, but they're like this will like cause you to see God, and they're like, what is this magical drink? And they're like, it's sangria. I thought that was hilarious. I was like, what? Like, what's the deal with sangria here? Like, I don't get it. Do you understand? Like,
well, I know it's like ladies like sangria.
I know a lot of older gentlemen who like sangria too. I mean, I've had some sangrias from time to time. I thought it was pretty funny. I don't really understand why sangria was such a focal point of the story.
RJ, little is known about the origins of this Spanish drink. According to the Sage Encyclopedia of Alcohol, sangria's origins cannot be pinpointed exactly, but early versions were popular in Spain, Greece, and England. Predecessor drink to sangria that was served either hot or cold, likely originated in the Caribbean, and there was introduced to mainland America, where it was common beginning in the American colonial era, but largely disappeared in the United States by the early 20th century. Sangria as an iced drink was reintroduced to the U.S. by the late 1940s through Hispanic Americans in Spanish restaurants and enjoyed greater popularity with the 1964 World's Fair in New York. And this movie came out 1 year later. Maybe Fellini had this sangria, and he was like, "Mamma mia," and hence history was made.
What do you think his response was?
Mamma mia? That's a spicy meatball.
Classic racism from
Italian.
Jarrett.
He's an Italian.
Oh, hey, mamma mia,
sangria.
Ooh. Well, I'm glad you did some digging on that, and I was just really curious. I was like, what's up with sangria being hitting so much in this movie? Like, if my movie focused on White Russians a lot, people would be like, oh, that must just be his drink. And I guess you could assume
and
the
you
same
watched
about Fellini. But
Well, or you watched Big Lebowski.
hey. I was drinking those way before Big Lebowski.
I hope not, because you were, what, 7? 8?
Maybe you were 7 or 8
Yeah.
drinking Big White Russians.
Yeah.
The point,
The
Jarrett,
point is,
sangria.
yeah.
You know, one last thing I'll say
Okay.
that I actually really liked about this movie, which I think it's a nice way to describe the movie as a whole for what Juliet is feeling. The one quote from the mysterious, depressed man, he says, he's talking about the garden, and he says, "Flowers are grateful when loved." Oh. And I thought that was a very nice thing, and it was kind of talking about this. I felt like that represented the movie as a whole. It's what the whole movie is about, man.
Yeah.
Anyways, I don't know.
Yeah.
I've said my spiel, but I did like this movie.
Good. I feel, so I mean, I would say for folks listening, maybe listening for a recommendation or whatever you listen to our show for, this is a very literary movie. I feel like it's got a lot more weight to it than a lot of movies. It's, you got to unpack some stuff, but boy, the final 40 minutes of this movie or whatever it is, they're incredible. Like, it is some top tier filmmaking going on right there.
Yep.
And I mean, I'm gonna probably inundate the Instagram with stills from this movie because I've got a lot of them. There's so much stuff, so many good things going on. This is a movie that definitely deserves to get released on Blu-ray, since watching this in standard def on a stream, you can definitely see the where there's some limitations there, and this movie would just be the colors would be so much better. And I don't know if I mentioned this is Fellini's first color film.
Oh, you didn't mention, and I feel like our podcast is a sham.
That was, I think, actually my second note on my notes, but then you wanted to know why I watched this movie twice.
I did want to know why you watched this movie twice, and I was very taken aback by that. Because frankly, it was a little weird.
I guess.
Well, it's just weird. You've never done that before, so I was like, "What the fuck?"
I have.
was like, "What's going on here?"
I watched 8.5 twice.
With commentaries.
No, I don't think I did actually.
Well, maybe that day I didn't look at Letterboxd and I didn't see what you were doing. How's that sound?
The things you don't know, RJ.
Hey, I don't think I've ever made grand leaps in my logic or what I'm doing.
Well, RJ, this brings us to that portion of the show where we talk about who hates Juliet of the Spirits.
It's a good question.
We got two contenders here who actually give lengthy posts about their problem, which is a rarity.
Sure.
Usually there's pithy comments, but these are actually well thought out, I guess. I'm going to find out because I haven't read them yet. Jacob Flash, 1.5 star. I am fully aware that Roger Ebert gave this film 4 stars, and critics in general praise it in unison. But I have to be honest with myself and say that Juliet of the Spirits is a bit pretentious to me, and not in a good way. What's the good form of pretension?
What is a good form of pretension?
Yeah, it literally is acting like you're better than what you are. I mean, that's not a good thing. On the whole, I don't mind style over substance cinema, thematic symbolism, the idea of digging into the narrative in search for deeper meaning, projecting the filmmaker onto his work, or my own personal shit to find symmetry between the film's themes and something seemingly unrelated. But Juliet of the Spirits lacks a driving force to propel me to do any of that. It's tedious, unfocused, and downright exhausting. Filled with undoubtedly colorful imagery and hallucinatory visions, this is, according to many, Fellini's forgotten masterpiece. Perhaps it is my willful arrogance mixed with simple ignorance, as I am not too intimately familiar with Fellini's other works, but I can only describe Juliet of the Spirits as annoying in its attempt to address a simple theme of a woman's journey of self-discovery fueled by the need to deal with her husband's infidelity in Wizard of Oz attire. Because you know what? Wizard of Oz was first and foremost entertaining, and Fellini took all of this for granted and crafted a film that, sure enough, has a lot of depth to it, but it is not a depth I am in the least willing to explore.
Wow.
There is a difference between snorkeling on a coral reef and in your local lake. So I'll leave you to figure out where Juliet of the Spirits fits in this metaphor.
I mean, he wrote a lot of stuff.
He did actually just write. He mostly just wrote a lot of stuff, I think.
Looking at how Jacob rates movies, I wholeheartedly disagree. He gave The Keep 1 star. He gave Mortal Kombat 1 star, which I don't think that's a 1-star movie.
Well,
Let's just
Juliet of the Spirits is only half a star better.
Well, Jarrett, he gave Payback with Mel Gibson 1 star.
That seems to be a movie that people dump on hard now. I don't.
Hey.
No. I'm just saying.
That movie's. I know you like that movie, but that movie's amazing. Why do people dump on that?
I don't know.
That doesn't make any sense. But this person's ratings don't make any sense either. Like he's given a bunch of very clearly not 5-star movies 5 stars. Gravity, Diabolique, Halloween, the new 2018 Blumhouse Halloween. First Man, like that movie is good, but it's not 5 stars. Hereditary, School of Rock, The Faculty, like this guy's Big Sick. This guy's all over the map.
Man. Everybody
wants some. Ugh. That movie's not even good. Baby Driver, Hell or High Water, Christine, which we just talked about. This guy's pretty hot and loose with his 5-star reviews. He's not to be trusted.
I feel like this guy just wants to snorkel in his local lake.
Yeah, not to be trusted.
Contrary to his claim otherwise. I feel like that's what he'd do. All right, next up, The Volta. 1.5 star. Nothing is developed. Every concept this film contains is introduced within the first 15 minutes, and these concepts become tools of tedium. That's twice tedium's appeared soon after. Juliet of Messina is directed horribly. Fellini doesn't utilize her enormous talent for powerful and affecting facial expressions. Well, okay, we'll talk about that. But instead has her project a dull series of basic emotional reactions, which is accurate because she's repressed. And then there's those moments like at the end of the movie, her big final shot where she's like relieved. It's almost like it pays off, RJ. Her dialogue... Her dialogue is devoid of wit or prosody. That's a word.
Prosody?
Prosody. That's a word I don't come across very often.
So, I do know prosody. It is, from what I understand, this is a very simplified explanation, but it's kind of like the melody of the delivery of the dialogue.
See, I always think of cadence.
Yeah, cadence is another way. Prosody is like
pattern of rhythm and sound used in poetry.
Yeah, it's technically different.
Poetry is the lowest form of art, so that's probably why I haven't encountered that word very often. Okay, well, we now I know a new word, and I will never continue to not use it.
Good for you, though.
Just so it lacks wit or prosody or novel observations. The development from her confusion to her liberation is so poorly paced and lacking in any focused conflict that the palatial world Fellini crafted can't carry film past the lack of anything compelling going on. A sentiment of personal autonomy runs within the film, which I support, but none of the film's components contribute to communicating this message. I just have to infer that's what I can take from this film because nothing going on seems to have any reason to be other than quick aesthetic astonishment. Holy shit. And the same can be said about Satyricon, but the aesthetic astonishment that Satyricon projects doesn't fade like it does here. Satyricon lingers and evolves as its own rhythm, but Juliet of the Spirits has no rhythm. Fellini may have once had an idea for what feelings he wanted this film to create, like the feeling of the occult in Satyricon, but he lost it and ended up with a mess of gaudy, decorative experiments and parapsychological half-thoughts. 1 star for Nina Rota's score and a half star for the font chosen for the credits, but nothing more, sadly.
I think the Volta is an ed student. Using things like prosody and autonomy, like those are pretty generic things, but I think the Volta is an ed student, Jarrett. They only have 4 1-star ratings. One of them I agree with completely, Beyond the Black Rainbow. But then also Don't Breathe, that's not 1 star. Lava Land, Haunting of Hill House, Those aren't really 1-star things.
Yeah, those are hot take alerts. Do they have
take.
Do they have reviews?
They might. I'll check.
I suspect that they probably are packed full of the same pomposity.
They might, yeah. But check out these 5-star reviews, Jared. You got some good movies like Texas Chainsaw, In the Mood for Love. But then you have some movies that are very clearly not 5 stars, such as Picnic at Hanging Rock and Cleo from 5 to 7, which is a movie, Cleo from 5 to 7, which I think has popped up consistently for people who have hated the last like 20 Criterions, which is like so bizarre. But also like lots of Criterions for 5 stars, but the big one I think is The Night of the Hunter, which I've mentioned before.
We've alluded to.
We alluded to before. That might have been the preamble, but I find it funny when people shit on movies like Juliet of the Spirits, and then they give Night of the Hunter 5 stars. It's like, like, but why though?
But why?
Why?
Yeah.
But why?
Well, we give the voice to all sides of the argument, so we get what's coming to us, I suppose.
We don't have to.
No, we don't. But as discussed earlier, we like our filler.
Well, we got to do something in this whole thing that we do here.
That's right. So that's it. I think this movie is pretty great. Save like the scenes I talked about that I was like, nah, I'm still not a fan. But man, when it's good, it's cooking.
Cooking how?
With gas.
Cooking with gas. Wow. Wow, Jarrett. Unbelievable. Yeah, it's good.
After the break, RJ's taking a trip to Milan. And he's going to give me a call later. But he might take a few more days. His doctor said he's tired and he's going to take some time away.
What are you talking about, dude? Did that happen in this movie?
Yes.
Oh, what did I watch? I don't know.
I don't know.
I'm getting worse at this thing.